On the evening of June 20th, 1947, one of the most dangerous men in America was sitting on a floral sofa, reading tomorrow's newspaper. Within minutes, he would be unrecognizable, and by the time police arrived, something that had been part of his face was lying 15 feet from his body on the cold tile of the dining room floor. Benjamin Siegel helped build Las Vegas. He was a founding killer of Murder Incorporated, the mob's personal death squad. He had survived decades of gang wars, police investigations, and assassination attempts. But on that warm California night, sitting behind an open window in a Beverly Hills mansion, 9 bullets came through the glass. And the organization he had helped build, the most powerful criminal empire in American history, didn't just let it happen. They ordered it. More than 75 years later, no one has ever been convicted. The case remains open, sealed behind the mafia's wall of silence. But there are answers. Deathbed confessions. Forensic evidence suggesting not one but 2 gunmen. And a girlfriend who just happened to be on another continent when the bullets flew. The official story is that Siegel stole from the mob and paid the price. But the truth is darker, messier, and more brutal than any Hollywood version has ever shown you. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what happened in those final seconds inside that Beverly Hills living room. Every shot, every wound, every detail the newspapers couldn't print. And you'll understand why this murder, more than any other, defined how the American Mafia did business for the next 50 years. But first, let me take you back to the man himself. If you're fascinated by the untold stories behind history's most infamous crimes, hit that like button and subscribe. I break down cases like this every week with the details no one else covers. Now, let me take you back to where Bugsy Siegel's story really begins. Benjamin Hyman Siegelbaum was born in 1906 in the tenement slums of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where poverty was a given and violence was the only currency that bought respect. By the time he was a teenager, he had already decided that legitimate work was a dead end, that the streets offered faster returns for a young man willing to get his hands dirty, and Siegel was willing. He was handsome enough that Hollywood actresses would one day seek his company, charming enough to light up any room he walked into. But he was violent enough that no one who actually knew him dared use the nickname Bugsy to his face. It referred to his explosive, unpredictable temper, the kind of rage that made him seem genuinely unhinged, and using it was a potentially fatal insult. The partnership that defined his life began on the Lower East Side. Meyer Lansky was everything Siegel was not. Where Siegel was flash and fury, Lansky was the calculator, the financial architect who turned street crime into a national business. They had been inseparable since adolescence, and together they formed the Bugs and Meyer mob, which evolved into the enforcement arm of organized crime, Murder Incorporated. Siegel was implicated in numerous contract killings, including Harry Big Greenie Greenberg in 1939 and Tony Fabrizzo in 1932. He wasn't just a gangster, he was an executioner. And here's the detail that makes everything that follows feel inevitable. Siegel understood, better than most, what happened to men the Syndicate deemed a liability. He had pulled the trigger himself, more than once. By the early 1940s, Siegel had been sent to California to expand Syndicate operations on the West Coast. He embedded himself in Hollywood, befriending actors, attending premieres, dating starlets. He lived like a movie star and carried himself like one. It was in this world that he met Virginia Hill, and she deserves more than a passing mention. Hill was the mob's most trusted courier, a woman who carried hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash between crime bosses across the country, all while maintaining the cover of a Southern socialite with expensive taste and a magnetic smile. She and Siegel became inseparable. To understand why Siegel's death was possible, you need to understand the world he operated in. The National Crime Syndicate was an alliance of Italian and Jewish organized crime families that functioned as a loose board of directors for all major criminal enterprise in America. Lucky Luciano had been exiled to Italy, but still pulled strings from abroad. Frank Costello ran New York operations. Lansky controlled the money, and Jack Dragna, the boss of Los Angeles, controlled Southern California's rackets and deeply resented Siegel's presence on his turf. In this world, friendship meant nothing against the bottom line. Loyalty was currency, and it could be devalued overnight. The mob operated on results, and anyone who became a financial liability was eliminated. No exceptions. So when Siegel came to Lansky with a vision, a palatial casino in the Nevada desert, a place that would make them all richer than they had ever imagined, Lansky listened. The Syndicate invested. And for a while the dream looked real. But what happens when a man who has killed for the Syndicate begins to look like he's stealing from it? Siegel's vision was audacious. A luxury casino hotel rising out of the sand outside Las Vegas, a dusty stopover town that most Americans couldn't find on a map. He saw what others didn't, that legalized gambling, combined with Hollywood glamour, could create a money machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. He named it the Flamingo, reportedly after Virginia Hill's nickname, a reference to her long legs, though the origin has been debated for decades. The original budget was around $1.5 million. It was an ambitious number, but the Syndicate's investors signed off. Then, the budget started to climb. Building materials were being stolen from the construction site and sold back to Siegel at inflated prices, and he either didn't notice or didn't care. Subcontractors overcharged. Siegel demanded the finest materials available, imported marble, exotic woods, custom fixtures for every room. He redesigned and rebuilt entire sections of the hotel on a whim, tearing down finished walls because they didn't meet his vision. The final price tag exceeded $6 million. In 1947, that was an almost incomprehensible sum, equivalent to roughly $80 million today. The Syndicate's investors, Lansky, Luciano, Costello, and others, watched their money evaporate into desert concrete. $6 million. In mob money, unaccounted for. If you understand nothing else about this story, understand this. In the world Siegel operated in, that was not a debt. It was a death sentence. The opening was a disaster. December 26, 1946. Rain in Los Angeles grounded the chartered flights meant to bring Hollywood stars to the grand premiere. The casino floor was half empty. Guests who did make the journey found an unfinished hotel where some rooms had no doors and the plumbing didn't work. The casino lost money on its opening night. It was a humiliation visible to every crime boss in America. And then came the whispers that cut deepest. Syndicate bosses believed, or chose to believe, that Siegel and Virginia Hill had been skimming construction funds. Hill had been making frequent trips to Swiss banks. Whether Siegel was genuinely stealing or simply catastrophically incompetent with the money, the result was the same. The most dangerous investors in America believed they had been cheated. In December of 1946, the mob's leadership gathered in Havana. Luciano had traveled there from Italy. The Flamingo's failure was discussed in rooms where decisions carried the weight of death sentences. Lansky, who had backed Siegel since childhood, was put in an impossible position. He reportedly argued for more time, for patience, for one more chance. The consensus reached was conditional. Siegel would be given an opportunity to make the Flamingo profitable. If he failed, the matter would be settled permanently. Jack Dragna had been waiting for this moment. He had resented Siegel's presence in Los Angeles for years. Siegel had muscled in on Dragna's bookmaking operations, treating the local boss like a subordinate. Dragna had both territorial and financial reasons to want Siegel removed, and now, with the Flamingo debacle, he had the Syndicate's implicit blessing to act. Then there was Mickey Cohen, Siegel's enforcer and bodyguard in L.A. Cohen knew Siegel's schedule, his habits, his movements. He was part of the inner circle. But he was also ambitious, positioning himself to take over L.A.'s rackets if Siegel fell. And on the night of June 20th, Cohen was conspicuously absent. 1 week. Hill left exactly 1 week before the shooting. Coincidence? In the Mafia, there are no coincidences. By mid-1947, the Flamingo had briefly reopened and was beginning to turn a modest profit. It looked like Siegel might actually survive this, but the profit came too late. The decision had already been made, voted on in Havana, ratified by silence. Siegel's fate was sealed, and everyone around him seemed to know it except Siegel himself. This was a man who had spent his life reading threats, who had survived by instinct and violence, but the Flamingo had consumed him. He was distracted, overextended, convinced he could still make it work. He couldn't see that the men smiling across the table from him had already written him off. And then, 1 week before the night that would end his life, Virginia Hill packed her bags and boarded a flight to Paris. The stage was now set. All that remained was the final evening and the 9 bullets that would change Las Vegas forever. It is a warm Friday evening in Los Angeles, June 20th, 1947. The day is unremarkable on the surface. Benjamin Siegel has no appointments that suggest alarm. He is not hiding. He is not surrounded by bodyguards. He is living openly, almost casually, in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America. The house sits at 810 North Linden Drive in Beverly Hills. It is a Moorish-style mansion with pink stucco walls, arched windows, and lush gardens that spill onto a quiet, tree-lined street. Virginia Hill rents it from Rudolph Valentino's former agent for $500 a month. The irony is layered thick enough to taste. The most dangerous man on the West Coast is staying in a rented house. His girlfriend's rented house. And she isn't even there. Hill, conveniently on another continent, has left behind her furniture, her secretary, her brother, and a living room with a picture window that faces the driveway like an open invitation. Think about that for a second. A man who has killed for the mob, who knows better than anyone how contract hits work, is sitting in a house with no bodyguards, no reinforced doors, no drawn curtains, on a street where anyone can park a car, walk up the driveway, and see straight through the living room window. Either Siegel believed he was untouchable, or the Flamingo had blinded him so completely that he had forgotten the first rule of the world he lived in. Everyone is touchable. That evening, Siegel dines at Jack's at the beach, a well-known restaurant in Ocean Park near Santa Monica. He orders trout. He is accompanied by 3 others, including his loyal associate Alan Smiley. The restaurant is lively, glasses clink, the Pacific Ocean is visible through the windows, and the last daylight is fading over the water. Siegel is charming, expansive, the version of himself that Hollywood fell in love with. He laughs easily. He orders with confidence. He has no idea that someone, or several someones, already know exactly where he will be sitting in a few hours. Someone had to know his schedule for the night. Someone had to know he would return to Linden Drive, that the living room drapes would be open, that the lamp would be on. This was not opportunistic. This was planned with military precision. Every detail of the evening, from the dinner reservation to the return home, had been anticipated. Across the table, Alan Smiley laughs at something Siegel says. In a few hours, Smiley will have 3 bullet holes through his jacket sleeve. Here's what makes this murder different from almost any other mob hit in history. It wasn't a car bomb. It wasn't a garroting in a back room. It wasn't a bullet in a dark alley. It was a sniper operation. Military-grade weapon, pre-scouted kill zone, calculated fields of fire. This was an assassination. Siegel and Smiley returned to 810 North Linden Drive around 10:30 in the evening. The house is quiet. Hill's brother, Chick Hill, is elsewhere inside. Siegel settles onto the chintz-covered sofa in the living room, the same sofa positioned just 4 feet from the picture window. He picks up the early edition of the next day's Los Angeles Times, a newspaper carrying tomorrow's date. He is literally reading the future, a future he would not live to see. The drapes on the living room window are open. A table lamp is on, positioned in a way that illuminates Siegel's head and upper body with warm, steady light. From outside, anyone standing in the driveway or the garden would have a clean, unobstructed, well-lit view of the sofa and the man sitting on it. The jasmine-scented air of a Beverly Hills summer night drifts through the property. The rose garden along the side of the house is in full bloom, a lattice trellis, a pagoda-style wooden structure covered in climbing roses, stands near the window, partially concealed by shrubbery. It is the perfect rifle rest. It is 10:44 in the evening. In 60 seconds, everything changes. At 10:45, Benjamin Siegel turns a page of the Los Angeles Times. The living room is warm. The lamp glows. Through the window, the roses are in bloom. And somewhere in the darkness of the driveway, a rifle barrel settles onto the trellis. What happened next lasted less than 5 seconds. But the brutality of those seconds would become the single most infamous image in the history of organized crime. The shooter is concealed in shadow, standing in the archway that leads to the driveway, shielded from the street by the shrubbery that lines the property. Beverly Hills in 1947 has no reason for foot traffic at this hour. The neighborhood is silent. No voices, no passing cars, only the faint sound of crickets in the warm night air. The weapon is a .30 caliber M1 military carbine. This is not a pistol fired from a passing car, not the crude instrument of a street hit. This is a semi-automatic rifle developed for the United States military during World War II, capable of accurate fire at ranges far exceeding the distance between the trellis and the window. Millions of these weapons had flooded the surplus market after the war ended, making them readily available to anyone with the right connections. The choice of weapon tells us something critical about the shooter. This person has access to military hardware and knows how to use it with precision. This is not an amateur with a grudge. This is a professional on a contract lattice. The wooden frame providing a stable shooting platform. The roses, red and blooming, fragrant in the June night, conceal the barrel from anyone who might glance down the street. The shooter is 14 feet from the window. 14 feet. Barely the length of a car. At that range, a .30 caliber carbine doesn't just wound, it destroys. Through the glass, Siegel is clearly visible. The table lamp backlights his head and shoulders, turning him into a silhouette that could not be easier to target. He is absorbed in the newspaper. He does not look up. He does not sense anything. For a man who spent his life surrounded by violence, who had ordered so many deaths himself, his final moment is one of utter domestic tranquility. A man on a sofa reading the paper, in a house that smells like roses. The forensic analysis that would follow, conducted by expert Clark Fogg, would raise a question that has never been fully answered. The precision of what is about to happen, 2 devastating wounds to the face, both catastrophically accurate, suggests there may have been 2 shooters. One gunman fires the first shot to the head. The violent recoil of Siegel's skull would make a second precise facial wound nearly impossible from the same weapon in rapid succession, because the target's position would change dramatically in the fraction of a second between rounds. A second shooter, positioned nearby, may have fired simultaneously or within a heartbeat of the first. This theory has never been confirmed. But it deepens the picture. This was not one man with a grudge. This was a coordinated execution. Try to picture this scene: a quiet Beverly Hills street, a pink mansion, roses climbing a garden trellis, and behind those roses, a military rifle aimed at a man reading the newspaper. This is the mafia at its most coldly efficient and its most theatrical. At 10:45 in the evening, the first shot explodes through the picture window. Then another. 9 rounds in rapid succession. The carbine's semi-automatic action, allowing the shooter to fire as fast as he can pull the trigger. The plate glass of the window detonates inward, spraying the living room with a crystalline shower of shards that scatter across the carpet, the furniture, and the man on the sofa. The sound is unmistakable. A .30 caliber carbine is not quiet. The reports crack through the night air like a string of firecrackers, sharp and percussive, echoing off the stucco walls of neighboring mansions. In the stillness of Beverly Hills, every shot rings like a thunderclap. Neighbors will later report hearing the volley, and then, almost immediately, the sound of a car engine revving hard. Of the 9 rounds fired, 4 find their target. The first strikes Siegel in the face with enough force to end his life instantly. The damage is beyond what most people can imagine a single bullet causing. Bone shatters. The impact propels his left eye completely from its socket, sending it on a trajectory across the room where it comes to rest on the dining room tile, 15 feet from where he sits. Cerebral hemorrhage is instantaneous. Siegel is almost certainly dead before the next round arrives. A second round tears through his right cheek and exits through the back of his neck, compounding facial destruction so severe that identification would later require personal recognition by associates rather than visual confirmation alone. Between the 2 head wounds, the man who had charmed Hollywood and terrorized his enemies is rendered unrecognizable. 2 additional rounds strike his torso, his chest and upper body absorbing impacts that are catastrophically redundant. He is already gone. These are insurance shots, or perhaps the work of a second shooter firing simultaneously at center mass while the primary gunman targeted the head. The 5 remaining rounds tear through the living room with indiscriminate violence. One strikes a white marble statue of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, sitting on the piano. The statue explodes into fragments. Other rounds embed themselves deep in the far wall. The room, seconds ago warm and quiet and lamplit, is now a devastation of broken glass, plaster dust hanging in the air, and the smell of cordite drifting through the shattered window, mixing with the scent of roses from the garden outside. 9 shots, 4 hits, 2 to the face, 1 eye found 15 feet away. The entire sequence lasted less than 5 seconds. Siegel slumps into the sofa, his body driven sideways by the cumulative impact. The newspaper, tomorrow's Los Angeles Times, remains in his lap. The age of Bugsy Siegel ended in a single burst of gunfire. And in those 5 seconds, the most feared gangster on the West Coast was reduced to a crime scene photograph that would haunt American culture for the next 8 decades. The last echo of the final shot fades into the Beverly Hills night. The living room is destroyed. Glass covers every surface. Plaster dust settles through the lamplight like slow-falling snow. The marble Bacchus lies in fragments across the piano keys. The lamp is still on. It still illuminates the sofa, but now it illuminates something that will be seared into the American consciousness the moment the photographs are published. Alan Smiley is on the floor. Siegel's associate had been sitting nearby when the first crack of gunfire split the air, and he had thrown himself down with the instinct of a man who understood immediately what was happening. 3 rounds had passed through the sleeve of his jacket. Not one had touched his skin. He is shaking, his ears ringing, his body covered in glass shards. He is the only living witness to the murder of Bugsy Siegel, and he will never identify the shooter. Whether he truly saw nothing through the chaos of shattering glass and muzzle flash, or whether he simply understood that speaking meant dying, the result is the same. Silence. Whatever he saw through the shattered glass, he took it with him. Smiley survived that night, eventually left the world of organized crime entirely, became an oilman, and lived until 1982 without ever speaking publicly about what happened in that living room. Outside, a neighbor hears a car engine start almost immediately after the shots cease. The vehicle accelerates hard, heading toward Sunset Boulevard, though one conflicting account places the direction toward Wilshire. The speed, the direction, the instant timing, all of it points to a planned extraction. A getaway car had been idling with the driver ready, the engine warm, the route mapped. Here's the detail that tells you everything about how this was planned. The car was already running. Before the last shell casing had finished bouncing on the pavement outside the window, the killer had vanished into the Los Angeles night. Linden Drive falls quiet again. Lights begin to flick on in neighboring houses. Someone reaches for a telephone. But for a few long seconds, the only sound is the faint rustle of newspaper pages stirred by the breeze now flowing freely through the shattered window. The newspaper still in his lap. Tomorrow's news for a man who would never see tomorrow. But here is where the story turns from murder into something colder, something corporate. Within minutes of Siegel's death, while his body was still warm on the sofa in Beverly Hills, 3 men walked into the Flamingo Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Gus Greenbaum, Mo Sedway, David Berman. All 3 were Meyer Lansky's associates. They announced to the Flamingo's staff that they were now in charge. There was no negotiation, no discussion, no period of mourning, no pretense of shock or grief. The takeover was instantaneous and total. Think about what this means. 3 men, 600 miles away in Las Vegas, walk into a casino and assume control at the precise moment its owner is killed in Beverly Hills. This was not a reaction to the news. This was the plan. The murder and the takeover were a single operation, 2 halves of the same move, coordinated down to the minute. The $6 million that signed his death warrant was never really about punishment. It was about ownership. Meyer Lansky, Siegel's oldest friend, his partner since they were teenagers running the streets of the Lower East Side, had signed off on this. He had to have. Greenbaum, Sedway, and Berman did not move without Lansky's word. The man who had stood beside Siegel for 30 years had given the order that ended his life. This was not how you mourn a friend. This is how you liquidate an asset. Let me ask you something. If Lansky truly believed Siegel was stealing, if the money was genuinely embezzled, why take over the casino at all? Why not shut it down, write off the loss, walk away? The answer is simple. They always knew the Flamingo would work. They just didn't need Siegel to run it. Under Greenbaum's management, the casino became profitable within months. The vision Siegel had championed, luxury entertainment married to gambling in the desert, was not wrong. It was, in fact, the future of Las Vegas. Siegel had been right about everything except the one thing that mattered most, that the men funding his dream had a limit to their patience, and he had exceeded it by millions. This was not a murder. It was a corporate restructuring, executed with bullets. History pivoted on 9 shell casings in a rose garden. Minutes. That's how long it took. The blood hadn't dried. And 600 miles away, the Flamingo had new owners. Siegel was dead. The Flamingo had been seized. Now came the part that should have been simple, finding out who pulled the trigger. It wasn't. Beverly Hills police arrived at Linden Drive to find a scene of extraordinary violence concentrated in a single room. Siegel's body remained on the sofa, his face destroyed beyond easy recognition. The crime scene photograph that would later be published in newspapers nationwide, the empty socket, the shattered features, the newspaper in his lap, became the defining image of mob justice in America. Outside, investigators recovered 9.30 caliber shell casings near the lattice trellis. The firing position was obvious. Scuff marks on the ground, the angle of the ejected brass, the trajectory lines through the window all confirmed a shooter standing in the driveway archway. Clark Fogg's forensic analysis deepened the mystery rather than solving it. The forensic evidence suggesting 2 gunmen rested on a precise observation. The violent snap of Siegel's head after the first facial impact would have dramatically altered the target's position, making a second precisely aimed shot to a different area of the face nearly impossible for a single shooter firing in rapid sequence. 2 rifles, 2 shooters, 1 coordinated volley. The theory has never been proven. It has also never been refuted. The death certificate listed the cause as cerebral hemorrhage. Siegel was dead at 41. Deputy District Attorney Ernest Roll surveyed the scene and delivered an assessment that would prove prophetic. The killer, he said, may never be identified. In a normal murder, you look for motive. In a mob murder, everyone has motive. The question is not who wanted Bugsy Siegel dead. The question is who didn't. Meyer Lansky was the approver. The evidence is circumstantial but overwhelming. The Flamingo takeover, timed to the minute, could not have happened without his authorization. Multiple sources across decades have pointed to Lansky as the man who reluctantly gave the final approval. He reportedly agonized over it. the weight of a 30-year friendship pressing against the cold arithmetic of syndicate economics. But in the end, business was business. Jack Dragna was the organizer. With Siegel gone, Los Angeles' rackets reverted to Dragna's control. He had the syndicate's blessing, the local knowledge to plan the operation, and the personnel to execute it. Most investigators who have studied the case believe Dragna handled the logistics of the hit, selecting the shooters, scouting the location, coordinating the timing. Eddie Cannizzaro was the alleged triggerman. In 1987, 40 years after the murder, Dragna's former bodyguard and gopher made a deathbed confession. Cannizzaro claimed he had killed Siegel on a contract from Lansky, that he had been promised a comfortable retirement in exchange. He added one detail that carried the ring of human error within a perfect conspiracy. He had driven the getaway car the wrong way, toward Wilshire instead of Sunset, in his panic after the shooting. Detective Les Zoela, who had investigated the case for years, found key details in Cannizzaro's story inconsistent with the physical evidence. But the timing of the confession, a dying man with nothing left to lose and no reason to fabricate, gives it a weight that purely speculative theories cannot match. Frankie Carbo was the alternate suspect. Former Philadelphia boss Ralph Natale would later claim that Carbo, a known syndicate hitman with a long record of contract killings, was Lansky's chosen shooter. The theory is plausible. It is also uncorroborated by any physical evidence. Virginia Hill's role may have been the most chilling of all. She knew the house. She knew the schedule. She knew the layout of the living room, the position of the sofa, the fact that the drapes were habitually left open, and she left for Europe exactly 1 week before the murder. Whether she was explicitly told to leave or simply understood what was coming, her absence was not coincidence. She was, at minimum, the reason the killers knew exactly where Siegel would be sitting and exactly what they would see through that window. And then there was Cohen, who conveniently knew everything and was nowhere. Siegel's own bodyguard had known the evening's plans and was conspicuously absent that night. After Siegel's death, Cohen moved quickly to consolidate power over LA's rackets. He may not have pulled the trigger, but he almost certainly did not try to prevent what happened. 5 suspects, 5 motives, and not a single arrest. Not then, not ever. The investigation stalled almost immediately. The Mafia's code of omertà sealed the case like a vault door. Smiley, the man who survived, either saw nothing or knew that speaking was its own kind of death sentence. Hill, when she eventually returned to the United States and testified before the Kefauver Committee in 1951, admitted to mob connections but provided nothing that advanced the murder investigation. The case remains officially open, a murder no one has ever answered for. Over 75 years. No trial, no conviction, no justice, at least not the kind that happens in a courtroom. The Mafia delivered its own verdict long before any jury could. The photograph did the rest. That image of Siegel's body on the sofa, published in newspapers across the country, entered American culture and never left. The message was directed at every member of the syndicate: no one is untouchable. Organized crime expert Ralph Salerno assessed it plainly. The murder of Bugsy Siegel was not an act of passion or revenge. It was a business decision, executed with precision and advertised with a photograph. But the murder of Bugsy Siegel did not end with a cold case file. Its consequences reshaped an entire city and an entire industry. The Flamingo, under Greenbaum's management, became the model for every casino that followed on the Las Vegas Strip. The concept Siegel had championed, luxury and entertainment and glamour fused with gambling, became the fundamental DNA of modern Las Vegas. Every neon-lit mega-resort on that strip exists, in some sense, because a handsome gangster from Brooklyn saw the future in the desert and bet everything on it. He was right. He was just expendable. The syndicate's grip on Vegas tightened after Siegel's death and persisted for decades, only broken by the corporate era of the 1970s and 80s. Siegel's murder didn't end mob influence in Las Vegas. It streamlined it. The chaos of one man's ego was replaced by the cold efficiency of committee management, and the machine Siegel helped build consumed its operators one after another. Gus Greenbaum, the man who walked into the Flamingo on the night of Siegel's death, was himself murdered in 1958, along with his wife, their throats cut in their Phoenix home. The cycle devoured everyone it touched. Virginia Hill testified before the Kefauver Committee in 1951, famously telling senators she had only known Siegel socially and calling him the love of her life in the same breath. She spent the remaining years drifting through Europe, increasingly isolated, increasingly broke, the glamour stripped away year by year until nothing remained but memory and regret. In 1966, she was found dead near a stream in Koppel, Austria, an overdose of sleeping pills, her body lying in a snowdrift, ruled a suicide. She was 49 years old. Lansky never spoke publicly about Siegel's death, not once, not in interviews, not to biographers, not to anyone on the record. He lived to 80, dying of lung cancer in 1983, having never spent a single day in prison, despite a lifetime at the center of American organized crime. When asked about the old days, he was said to have replied simply, "We were bigger than U.S. Steel." A man on a floral sofa, reading tomorrow's newspaper, in a house that smelled like roses. 4 feet from the glass, 14 feet from where his eye would come to rest. Now you understand the full weight of each of those distances. The vulnerability, the precision, the cold machinery behind every element of that evening. Bugsy Siegel spent his life building empires with bullets and charm. In the end, the empire only needed the bullets. 4 feet, 14 feet, 3 distances that tell the whole story of Bugsy Siegel's life and death. If this story gripped you, subscribe. There are more like it coming.